First of all, just want to give a word of thanks for the opportunity to be here on this stage. Um, Pastor Chris and Pastor Moore has given us an opportunity to use their edifice, and I'm just overjoyed and just like a horse ready to just run out of the gate. And so I'm glad that they opened that gate and are letting me just boat through that thing right now. And so I give honor to them, and I give an honor to God for making it a way, even in a time where there's social distancing. I just met two gentlemen today that I know will be long life friends. And so I'm just appreciative of God for even in this space allowing for his word and relationships to flourish. And without further ado, I just want to get into this word today. We're going to come to you today with a familiar story and even with a familiar character. But instead of starting where the bulk of our presentation will be in the fight between a young David and a giant Goliath, even before getting to that, we kind of have to realize that that's not the beginning of the story. David wasn't just born into that spot where he was to fight Goliath. David just didn't happen to get there. And so if we go a little bit before that, even to the beginning of the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel, we'll find David is not in the palace. David is not in the barracks with the military. David is in fact out in a field with the sheep. David is a shepherd. You see, he's the eighth born son. When you have a lot of sons, and during that time, the firstborn son gets the bulk of the inheritance. The firstborn son, since he's going to get half of the inheritance, most of the attention is given to him for his growth and to edify him so that one day he'll be ready to take over. And then when you have another son, he has an avenue for, the firstborn son needs a little help. But then when you have a third son, see, the third son isn't as useful or isn't as fed into as the first two, but he's still something. But we have to realize in this day and age, we have David, who is not the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth son. David is the eighth son. There are no expectations for David. When you talk about divvying up a pie, generally, the eighth, you can cut it in half and cut it again and cut it again. But the reality is that they didn't expect David and don't expect much from him. And even to the point when we find him here at the beginning of the text, he is in the field with the sheep when the most revered, even over the king, when the most revered person in their society is coming to their house. David, instead of being at the house, is out in the field with the sheep. He's not even invited to the party. This is the preeminent, the best, the greatest time in this family's history where Samuel's going to come to the house. Everybody's excited. Everybody's getting ready. Everything is prepared. Everyone has on their best clothes. And David didn't even get an invitation. Can you see him? And how would you feel? It's bad enough that as an eighth son, the community don't expect anything from him. But when your family doesn't even expect you to do much. And so Samuel has come to the house, and David is out in the field, and I can see him with the sheep, and at least I got my sheep. And I can see him out there just kicking rocks, and I can understand the disappointment And that this monument, look, I won't even, I mean, if it was modern times, I'm not even going to be in the pictures. It's as if I didn't even exist. Everybody's there feasting and having a good time, and I'm out here with the sheep. And what we'll find out in just a few seconds is he didn't have to be with the sheep. It would be fine if the sheep didn't have anybody that could watch him. But keep reading the text and you'll find out that as David was watching the sheep, he started hearing somebody calling his name and running towards him. And it got louder and louder, and the person got closer, and he realized it was one of the servants who could have been watching the sheep in his stead, coming to relieve him and to tell him that they won't eat until you come to the party. And so I see David now. And it's kind of hard sometimes when we're upset to just flip the script and all of a sudden get happy. But I almost see him doing a face wipe. And I almost see him going from sad and discouraged to happy and elated. In fact, before when he wasn't even wanted, now they won't even eat without him. And I can see him running at first, but slowing down when he almost gets to the house. We know the story. David here is anointed king. Watch this now. He's anointed king, yet if you continue to read, even within the same chapter, after his anointing, he's still with the sheep. It's bad enough to be with the sheep when there's no expectations. But how even would you feel that after God has given you assurances that he has something special for you, after being anointed king, David is still with the sheep? And the question for us today is, because many of us are not happy in the places that we find ourselves. And the question for us is, well, what do you do when you've been anointed, but you're with the sheep? And David gives us the answers in this text, because watch what happens. Now, King Saul, the word of the Lord says that the Spirit of God left him. King Saul started to have a hard time. He started getting very grumpy. He started throwing stuff at people. Couldn't nobody handle him. And if the king say off with your head, it's off with your head. Everybody's tiptoeing around the palace because the king has foul moods, and they come frequently and more often. And so here there's a situation where somebody's trying to figure out, man, we got to do something for the king. And one of the servants has a bright idea. Watch what the servant says in 1 Samuel 16, 18, and 19. Then answered one of the servants and said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, a mighty valiant man, a man of war, prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And so David shows us that when we're with the sheep, what we're not trying to say today, and what the text is not telling you today, is that when you're with the sheep, you ought to just be happy. What the text is telling us today is that when you're with the sheep, you ought to be faithful with the sheep. You ought to be the best shepherd that anybody can find. Your name ought to go out as a shepherd among shepherds when you're with the sheep. Watch what happens. Listen, he's just a shepherd. He's an 8-born son. How is it that somebody all the way in the palace knows all of this about David? Somebody said your gifts will make room for you. And it's evident here because what they know about this man is that he's cunning in playing. He's a shepherd, but he's good. He's a great musician. He's a shepherd, but he's a mighty valiant man. Because whenever something crops up and the militia has to be called, he's a mighty valiant man. He's a shepherd, but he's a man of war. He's a shepherd, but he's prudent in matters. Not only is he good with the sheep, but when he comes to town to do business concerning the sheep, he's a prudent man. Come on now. He's not trying to get over on people, yet he's getting good deals. He's a shepherd, yet he's doing that so well that they're talking about him down at the palace. And when the king can't be consoled, they thought and they wanted somebody to come, and they came up with David. David was with the sheep, but he was faithful over a few, and it made room for him. And so that comes to you now. Because many times, when we're put in situations where we feel like this is not the end of our road, or this is just something on the way to where we want to go, many times we don't put in the same effort that we feel like we're going to put in later. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but the Bible is trying to tell us today, listen, if you're going to be a doctor, you have to be faithful over 10th grade biology. If you're going to be married, you have to be faithful in your current relationships. If you're going to drive a Beamer, you got to be faithful, come on, with your little Chevy. If you want to be the boss, you got to be faithful when you're an employee. If you want to be a leader, come on, you're not even a good, come on, some of us want to be church leaders and we bad members. Martin Luther King said, if you're going to be a street sweeper, come on, be the best a street sweeper you can. You be a famous street sweeper. So it doesn't matter whether you're a teacher, whether you're a nurse, whether you clean dishes at the local restaurant. Listen, God's saying today you ought to have some tight lesson plans. He's saying you ought to have a great bedside manner. He ought to say those dishes need to be the cleanest dishes anybody can find. Listen, it doesn't matter if I preach before thousands or hundreds or tens or two. I better preach my heart out like my life depends on it, because my life does depend on it. David gives us the example not of somebody who was wallowing in his situation, waiting for some miraculous thing to happen for him to be all of a sudden put in the palace, but David was faithful where he was, and that made room for his opportunity. And can I trip you out a little more? David went to the palace not to rule, but he went to the palace as a servant to the king. So whenever the king got upset, he would play his instruments to calm the king down. That was his job. And David could still be the type of person that has a problem with this. David could still trip, because how am I put in a situation where I'm supporting the person I'm supposed to replace? Why am I here in this position when I'm supposed to be in that position? David could have been the greatest hater, but if you really pay attention to what's going on, though David was a shepherd and now David is a servant, David has a bird eye view, not to just take the job. Come on, somebody knows Brett Favre. Somebody knows Rodgers. It would have been, everybody loves to come in as a rookie and take the job, but it's great if you get a chance to watch somebody on the job. Okay, let's go back to the text. It's great that David now has a bird's eye view of what not to do as the king. David here is just a musician, just a servant in the palace, but he's able to see and understand what's going on so that when he gets the position, some of us from the bench need to pay attention to what's going on so that when we put in, we're ready. And so here's David now on the bench, and what's messed up is now this is what really gets us sometimes, because David's now, in the palace, but not on the throne. and it's time for war. And if we keep reading, we find David back with the sheep. And how? Now, come on, we've been with David. We were with David when no one expected anything from him, and he was with the sheep. We were with David now when he was anointed king, but he was with the sheep. And now David has gotten a bird's eye view, and David has been in the palace, and yet he's sent back home, and again he's with the sheep. The Bible tells us while his older brothers were in the campaign, David was with the sheep, and his father told him, I need you to send some things or carry some things for me to your brothers. I need you to take some provisions because God has blessed us. Take some provisions to the army. While you're there, check on your brothers. The army, the Bible says, the army, the beginning of chapter 17 of 1 Samuel says, now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle and were gathered together in an area which belongeth to Judah and pitched between Shechem and Azekah in the Ephraim. Look at me. Before you preach, read your text and memorize all the cities. Amen? Amen. And so here we have now, the Goliath now is standing before the army as a champion. What a champion do to get in the hearts of the men, to encourage the men that fight with him. What a champion would do would go out before the true battle, and he would engage in a one-on-one competition with the champion from the other side, and whoever wins, their army will be encouraged and will just with vigor go into this fight on 10, and whoever loses, come on, somebody, y'all, let me help you. Let me help you because I've never been on the battlefield and with the champion. I've been there, but just about 16 Sundays. Every week I watch football games, and I'm such a fan. I'm such a fan that when the Pittsburgh Steelers win, you know, my next few days are gonna be good. Okay, you can talk about me if you want, but I'm just trying to tell you the truth today. When the Steelers lose, especially if they didn't seem like they were trying hard, I am so dejected that I need a minute, that I need some time to clear my head. All right, and so when you have a champion, they will give you a feeling of glory before the battle. And so here's Goliath trying to get a champion to come out from among the Israelites, and watch it how nobody comes. Day in and day out, Goliath has been begging for somebody to come out and fight, and won't nobody come out to fight. And so even without the fight, the hearts of those men that are under King Saul have been taken from them. And I see them standing there day in and day out, having to watch this man not only talk about them, but talk about their God. And here comes David with provisions. And David, who was being faithful over a few, now finds himself coming up on a situation that has been brewing for the last 40 days. I love it how God, listen, I love it. I love it how God will really set the scene. Yeah, I know. None of us want anything bad to ever happen, but the reality is God likes to set the scene. He likes to weigh the scales. He likes it to look real bad. And I love the way that this thing was just built up over time. And then finally, David comes on the scene, and David sees Goliath, and David hears Goliath, and David understands that what his fellow citizens are afraid of is his opportunity. It's funny. The reason they call it a window of opportunity and not a garage door is because your opportunity is a certain size. It's small. It's something you got to climb through. It's something you got to hurry up and get. It's not going to be open forever. And so here now, David is coming up on a scene where there's a giant and he's blaspheming and he's talking bad about God, and David is getting excited. All the troops are quiet. Don't nobody want to say nothing to stand out. You've been in class when the teacher's asking somebody to come up to the board and everybody trying not to move, not to make eye contact. Can you picture those folks? They don't want to be the champion. They don't want to be pointed at. They don't want to be called out. And here comes David just talking in his regular voice. Hey, what's going on? What's wrong? Y'all gonna let this man talk about y'all like that? Did you hear him just talk about God like that? And while they're trying to shush him, even his brothers are trying to get him to be quiet and telling him, why is he not back home with the sheep? David is like, man, are y'all serious? David is causing such a ruckus that they send him into the tent of the king. And he's like, look, I'll take care of this. And King Saul is confused because King Saul has just as much fear as everybody else. And he's confused and he's trying to tell him, listen, man, this man has been fighting from his youth. You're just the youth. What are you talking about? And David begins to tell the king some stories. The reason I'm confident, watch this, while you're tripping that you're a shepherd right now. Watch this. The reason David gives to Saul that he's confident is because once he was watching his sheep. And he said a lion came to get one of his sheep. And he said he smote the lion and then went up and killed the lion. He said, that's not it. Once there was a bear that came and the bear got one of my sheep. And so King Saul, I smoked the bear. And then I got up to the bear and I slew the bear. He said, King Saul, listen, just like I slew the lion and just like I slew the bear, I know that with God, I can take this giant out. King Saul, you know the story. King Saul gives him some armor that's too big and ill fit. And David says, man, he tries for a minute. Then he's like, look, I got to use my own stuff. This is not what I fight in. Look, I'm just going to take the weapons I always have with me. I'm going to take with me what I had when the lion came. I'm going to take with me what I had when the bear came. And I'm going to take that to this giant. And as he begins to go to the giant in his own armor, what we see here is a situation to where there's some confusion. Because David is the only one that understands that this is his opportunity. When everyone else sees the giant and his weapons are so massive that he has to have somebody standing in front of him holding his shield. And when they see the giant and they see how big and broad and loud and gruff he is, then they intimidate it. But what David sees is the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And so the Bible tells us that when the giant sees him, the giant is furious because now I've been asking for a champion and you're sending out this boy. I wanted to fight your best, and you're sending out somebody y'all didn't even bring to the battle. And so watch it, because now that Goliath is so mad, he does something real dumb. He's so upset that he lifts his visor and provides the very opportunity for his own downfall. Watch him now, because you have to understand, he tells David, come here, as if David is slow enough to fight him toe to toe. I don't know who I'm talking to, but just because they expect you to go toe to toe, don't mean you ought to go toe to toe. You ought not have to fight with the same tools that your enemy fights with. Just because somebody's politicking and working the phones behind your back, that doesn't mean you got to catch up by working the phones and politicking behind their back. You don't have to do what they're doing to get victory. And see, here, Goliath expects David to fight him as a melee fighter, but David is not a melee fighter. David is artillery. And what we know from year after year of watching the history of war, artillery always beats melee. And so whereas it looks like Goliath has the upper hand because he's big and he's strong and his weapons are huge, those things only hurt him when he's up against artillery. What am I talking about? David has a sling. Slingers in those days were the artillery of their armies. They are like the bowmen. They stand from afar and they shoot. And so David now is one who, and they say that thing when they start working that sling, that thing goes around 7 times a second. I mean, that thing sounds like a helicopter. And I can see him. I'm watching this thing, and everybody is expecting David to go toe to toe with him. But then they start hearing this sound. I can see everybody from both armies. I can even see Goliath, and he's getting confused. He's not. What are you doing, man? And I can see and hear the sounds from that place when the realization begins to hit some that this is no competition. Goliath don't have the upper hand. Goliath doesn't even have a chance. It's funny how we tell this story as if David is the underdog, but what we must realize is David is only the underdog if you're looking at it from the wrong angle. David is not silly enough to try to fight like Goliath fights, but David is going to fight with what God gave him. Listen, God had him shepherd for a reason. Not only did it provide for him an opportunity to learn how to do business and to be prudent in matters and give him the time to be proficient in instruments. We're so grateful of all the psalms and all the poetry that David has given us. Listen to me. Not only did God do that, but God, listen, in putting him as a shepherd, gave him an opportunity to learn how to use a shepherd's tools in war. And he became the right person for the right time. Listen, David, look at yourself. God had made you and fashioned you not to be like everybody else. But even the idiosyncrasies that make you different and make you stand out, and sometimes, especially in grade school, made you the butt of some jokes. Those things are the way you are fashioned makes you the perfect person for the situation God has for you. And so David seizes this opportunity, and now he's up against a man who thinks he's going to go toe-to-toe with him. But at the same time, David has pulled one of his stones out, and he has begun to work that sling, and he started running towards, listen, they thought he would be shaking in his boots, and the Bible tells me that he started running towards Goliath. So not only is it the velocity that he's getting with his sling, but he's also going to get some torque. He's also going to run a little bit, stop and sling that thing. And the Bible tells us that now your enemy, Goliath, has opened up the very way of his own demise by lifting up his visor. And we see that the rock now is flying and it sunk into his forehead. Goliath goes down. Everything is quiet. This is not the fight people expected to see. Everybody is stunned. What just happened? David is the first one to move. The Bible says he goes over and unsheathes the weapon of his enemy. And with his very own sword, Goliath's head rose. And you can see both sides of the equation. Where Saul's army, not really sure what's going on, but seeing Goliath on the ground, when they see David take his head, they realize, no, this thing really is over. He's not going to get up again. He's no longer a threat. The champion is down. And the enthusiasm that the Philistines had from being on the side that was jeering, the enthusiasm that they had as conquerors fled from them and poured right into Saul's army, and they began to run. And the Philistines, having had their courage leave them, began to run in the opposite direction. And so they began to get mowed down by the very army that they were jeering just hours before. And watch what's so important here. It wasn't enough that David was faithful over a few. It wasn't enough that he worked in such a way while he was with the sheep to gain many of the things that he would need as a king. It wasn't enough that he was doing that, but when the opportunity came, David was smart enough to seize the opportunity. And it wasn't enough that David seized the opportunity and slew Goliath, but now David has to do something that's very key and very important and that we sometimes forget. David has to show everybody else that this thing is done. David has to hold up the head of the giant to encourage those who would not move. There's somebody that when they see you come from feeding the sheep to slaying the giant, will be encouraged to go from where they are to where God has them to go. You see, all the army should have been up there fighting, but they were shaking in their boots. But when David testified that he'd been able to do the thing, come on, that encouraged others to run down one side and run up the other side and defeat the other army. And not only that, because sometimes we would testify about those who are in the near vicinity of where we are about how good God is. But God is telling us in this text to go even further than that. God's saying, don't even just testify to those people who are around to see it. But the Bible tells me that head was taken and it was taken on tour. That head was taken back to Jerusalem, because guess what? This man Goliath had brothers. And the testimony is that giants fall. And so even though Goliath had brothers, David only had to kill the one. But because David killed Goliath, come on, somebody, because David killed Goliath, people knew that giants could fall. And so it's up for us. Listen. The greatest stories start with the humble beginnings. And how dare God bring us from one place to another, and we act like the first place never existed. God's calling us to tell the whole story. God's calling us to tell somebody, this is how God brought me through. And if he can bring me from that place, he can bring you from your place. Today, we ought to be encouraged. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you are with the sheep and you've been half doing it and God's telling you to step it up and be faithful over a few. I don't know if you're on the cusp of an opportunity that you're not sure whether you're going to take it or not, when God has been preparing you for that thing and God's encouraging you. Jump through that window. Seize the opportunity. I don't know if you're the kind of person that God has already brought through a thing and you want to just rip off your rear view mirror. You would rather not even think about it. God's telling you, no. You need to tell somebody how good God is. Because if he did it for me, he can do it for you. And that's the totality of the lesson we get from the story of David and Goliath.